not having equality or equity in your communication with your partner is really harmful to the relationship. From my experience as someone who has worked with so many couples on their communication, when a couple I worked with broke up, it was usually because of lack of equity in the relationship.
I don't like to argue, so I say nothing and fume for days.
How do I set boundaries without sounding like a jerk?
I hate the idea that I might accidentally offend somebody, so sometimes I'd just rather say nothing at all.
Welcome to the Language Alchemy Podcast, and thank you for joining me today. This is your host, Alejandra, a transformative communication teacher and coach. I am devoted to helping multicultural individuals and couples on the path of transformation transform their lives and relationships through conscious communication. I'm so grateful you're tuning in to learn transformative communication tools that can bring more love and more peace into your life and all your relationships. If you listened to last week's episode 92, that I titled, Be Sure Equality is Present in Your Partnership, you know that episode was a Q&A episode. Q&A episodes are those in which I answer questions from you. In this case, I received a wonderful question from Diana from Los Angeles. And her question was so rich that I had to split that question in half. And I answered half of it last week. And today I am going to answer the other half. Diana's question was, how do you know if you're communicating with equality and equity in an intimate relationship? Last week, I talked about communicating with equality with your partner. Today, I am going to talk about how you can find out if you and your partner are communicating with equity. I'm so grateful to have such thoughtful listeners like Diana who asked this important question. Because as I said in the previous episode, healthy, mature, and conscious partnerships are those in which both partners share power. And shared power is present when you and your partner intentionally communicate with one another with equality and equity. Now, if you haven't listened to last week's episode 92, don't worry. I do encourage you to listen it though. You can listen to it first and then come back to this one, or you can listen to this episode 93, and then go and listen to episode 92. As we focus on equity today, let's start from the foundation of shared meaning. Last week, I told you about a picture that had two words, equality and equity. This picture shows bicycles and different kinds of people. The top part represents equality. I described the top part in episode 92. And by the way, I'm going to have that picture on Instagram so you can see it there at Language Alchemy. When it represents equality, it shows different people, a kid, a short and a tall person, and a person with a physical disability, and they all have the same bike. So in order to ride their bikes, the tall person has to hunch over, the kid has to stand on the pedals, and the person with a disability cannot ride the bike at all. So while equality is a beautiful value because everybody has access to the same thing, it may not be enough. Now I'm going to talk about the bottom part of that picture, which represents equity. On the bottom part of that picture, you see the same folks with their various ages, heights, and levels of ability. And like on the previous picture, every person has a bike. But the difference is that the child and the short person have smaller bikes. The tall person has a bigger bike. And the person with a physical disability has a reclining bike. So each person has something that will serve the same purpose. But that something takes their own individual needs into consideration. And that is equity. Now, last week, I gave you an example of having equality in an interaction with your partner in which you wanting to decide where to go on vacation. in order to have equality if you decide to talk for the same amount of time. But of course, it may be that one of you has been thinking about this a lot. And when you give yourself 5 minutes to talk about where to go on vacation, every second is filled with words. It may also be that your partner has not thought about this topic at all. And perhaps they're feeling stressed out about money. Or maybe your partner's information processing and communication style requires spending a lot of time considering things quietly in their mind before they can bring it up out loud. And so when their 5 minutes are given, they don't have much to say. So in this example, you are having equality, but it may not be what you need in that particular moment. Because in that particular moment, if your emotional landscape is different, if you have different communication styles and different information processing styles, then what you may need is equity. When you are communicating equity in your partnership, you would take into account not only your own information processing style and your own communication style, but you would also take into account your partner's styles. And before you even have that conversation about where to go on vacation, you have a conversation with your partner first about your desire to go on vacation. And then you talk about how you want to talk about that desire. After that, you ask your partner about their willingness to have a conversation about this topic with you. And if your partner agrees, that's when you decide how much time each of you needs to think about this and when it works to have that conversation about where to go on vacation. In this whole process, you may discover that you're both ready to have an initial conversation right now. Or it may be that you decide together that you will have this conversation later during the weekend, so you can both have the time and space you need to process information, to research, to think about it, to fantasize about it, and then you can sit down or you can go for a walk and have that conversation. This is how you embody equity in your communication with your partner. Now let's go a little deeper and look at some of the indicators that you and your partner do have equity in your relationship. And before I share these indicators that you have equity in your relationship, take a deep breath, make space inside, and consider your relationship with your partner. And if you don't have a partner at the moment, bring to mind a past relationship. Or you can also think of your most significant relationship at this moment. And now take another breath. Great. You are communicating equity with your partner when both of you respect and value each other's communication styles. When both of you respect each other's social interactive levels, whether you or your partner are an introvert, extrovert, or ambivert. You have equity when both of you understand and respect each other's individual's needs. When you both choose to have healthy conversations about difficult topics after checking in with one another that this is the appropriate time to have it. You both respect and value each other's backgrounds, and you both respect and value each other's boundaries. You both understand and respect each other's information processing styles. You both understand and have compassion for each other's past hurt or trauma. You both tolerate each other's triggers and your particular human limitations. You both respect and value each other's layers of culture, from food to notions of beauty and decision-making style. After listening to these 10 indicators of equity in your relationship, how many of these are present in the relationship you brought to mind? Most of them? Some of them? Just a few? Just make space to notice that without criticizing yourself or making yourself or your partner wrong. At this moment, what matters is to make room for noticing. And now that you are aware of this, let's look at some ways in which you can tell there's an absence of equity in your communication with your partner. When there's an absence of equity in the communication with your partner, you or your partner make fun of, disrespect, or devalue each other's needs, experiences, feelings, communication styles, cultural practices, trauma, information processing style, decision-making style, social interaction levels. And you or your partner hold all of the above against each other. Another indicator that equity is absent in the communication with your partner is when you have conversations with your partner regardless of whether your partner has space, or when you avoid having conversations with your partner even though you know that your partner has asked to talk about a certain topic. Equity is not present in your communication when you are afraid of saying something because your partner is going to make fun of you, and also when either of you consistently minimizes the other's concerns, pain, discomfort, experiences, and feelings, but you consider your own experiences, discomfort, pain, and feelings a big deal. In essence, we could say that you don't have equity in your communication with your partner when you consider you or your partner to have superior or inferior value than the other. And so when you don't have equity in your relationship, you tend to devalue your partner, or you tend to feel devalued by your partner. And what I'm about to say may be hard to hear, yet it's important for you to know. Not having equality or equity in your communication with your partner is really harmful to the relationship. From my experience, as someone who has worked with so many couples on their communication, when a couple I worked with broke up, it was usually because of lack of equity in the relationship. Why? Because when there's little or no equity in a relationship, you or both of you devalue each other. And devaluing one another is what destroys relationships. And now that you heard the indicators of the presence and absence of equality and equity in communication in these 2 episodes, if you're identifying that your partnership is not having much equality or equity, you are not alone. There are so many multicultural couples who have come to work with me on their communication, and even though they both shared the values of equality and equity at an intellectual level, they didn't really know how to communicate those values consciously and consistently in the relationship. If after hearing all this, you realize that you need support, please reach out and let's talk about how I can be of service to you. I can tell you that I have yet to meet a communication teacher or coach who talks about equity and equality in an intimate relationship or fully understands this. If you do find one, then by all means, get their support. And also, let me know about them so that I can reach out to them and have a colleague to engage in deep conversations about this. And if you'd like my support, at the moment, you can work with me for 3, 6, or 9 months. If you'd like to find out more, just go to languagealchemy.com/couples to read about how I work with couples. And if you would like to do this work by yourself, which would also benefit your partnership, you can go to languagealchemy.com/one-on-one. Once you're on my website, you can also schedule a communication coaching consultation with me, and we'll go from there. I'll add the links in the show notes. And now let's recap what you've heard in this episode. In this episode, episode 93, I answered the question from one of the Language Alchemy podcast listeners, which I split between the last episode and this one. In the last episode, I talked about how to be sure equality is present in your partnership. And in this one, I answered how to know you are communicating with equity in your relationship with your partner. I described the meaning of equity and gave you a communication example about what equity would sound like before and during an interaction with your partner. I also shared 10 indicators to show that there's equity in your communication, as well as described 6 ways of knowing that you are not having equity with your partner. Finally, I encouraged you to work in your communication if now you know that there isn't much equity in your relationship. I hope this episode was useful, informative, and transformative. And I hope it inspired you to take action, such as to explore these topics further, to have more awareness about your communication, to work with your internal dialogue and your relationship to power, to have conversations with your partner about equality and equity, or to seek support and work on your communication. If you'd like my support, I'll add the links in the show notes about how to reach out to me for an initial coaching consultation. And if you would like me to answer your communication question in the podcast during the next Q&A episode next month, go to languagealchemy.com/podcast question and enter your question there. Thank you so much for listening. And a special thanks to all the beautiful people who've worked with me on how to bring forth more equity in their relationships. You are the models of healthy, mature, and conscious relationships for our children, our families, our communities, and this world. And we all need your modeling. Next week, I'm going to talk about an inspiring resource to commit to your values. Until next week, and as we say in Argentina, ciao, ciao. Original music by Gary Lapo. You can find all links in the show notes at languagealchemy.com.